This is Chuck Schaefer of HCM TV, and I am joined by Greg Moran, founder and president of Checked.com. Greg, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Greg, in my talks with HR and business leaders, I find that employee screening technologies are often high on their agendas, but I also find that there's a lack of consensus understanding as to what these technologies should offer and should do. How would you describe the scope and the major capabilities of this technology?
Yeah, I think, when you talk about employee selection technology, you're talking about a pretty wide range, right? And, if you kind of think about selection just in a normal workflow, from an upfront early stage screening type assessment to, new online interview tools that are hitting the market today, to later stage assessments, and then where we play is around automated reference checking on the back end. So I think, when you kind of take a look at that entire landscape, there's a lot of different points where an organization can start to integrate this. Where Checked.com specifically focuses is on the early stage assessment and the back end automated reference checking. But again, a whole lot of points that an organization can start to look at integrating that type of technology.
Countless studies have shown that recruiting, when properly harnessed, can provide a competitive advantage in the war on talent. How does this type of technology enable that type of advantage?
Well, I think when you're talking about the war on talent, right? There's a couple different things. There's one, making sure that you are in the market in terms of being able to attract the top talent, and then being able to down select to the right hire is kind of the second part of that equation. I think where employee selection technology is definitely on the latter part of that. And we tell organizations all the time is you've got to cast as wide of a net as you possibly can at the top of the funnel, right? If you've got the right tools in place to screen through those candidates efficiently. And I think that's really where employee selection technology can come in. So in other words, if you're doing a good job in casting that net and you've got good selection tools to help you really efficiently move through that pool that of talent, that's really where you're going to see a pretty profound impact. I think one of the big challenges that organizations face, if you don't have good selection tools in place, if you're focusing all of your time and attention, say, around sourcing and then using just maybe standard interviews or something like that as your primary screening method, the problem that we often see is this whole concept of a couple years ago I wrote a book called Hire, Fire, and the Walking Dead. And the whole Walking Dead concept was, the person, you end up with a lot of Walking Dead in your organization, right? The person's not good enough where you'd ever rehire them again, but they're not bad enough to fire yet, right? And that's, I think, what you can end up with. So you've got to have the tools in order to really help you efficiently move from a really wide net of candidates down to that bottom line without taking tons of management time to do that. That's really where sort of next generation employee selection technologies can really come in. Again, whether that's assessment, automated reference checking on the back end, other tools in between, you've got to be able to move a candidate through without taking tons of management time in order to do that.
Let me hone in on some of that employee screening that you're speaking to. How does this employee screening technology take the speculation or the guesswork out of the talent acquisition process?
By applying behavioral science. So really what's happening there is we can go into an organization, we can identify what are the core competencies or core traits that really would make somebody successful, not only in a general sense of, say, a successful salesperson or something like that, right? But really make them successful at your organization in this specific job. What makes one person successful at one company in the identical job doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate over. There's a whole lot of organizational factors that start to come in. Where behavioral science can really be applied is to go into an organization, identify those competencies and traits that are consistent among your top performers and also lacking among your bottom performers, right? What you want to understand is you want to understand both ends of that. What makes somebody, what the consistencies among the top performers tell you this is what makes somebody succeed. Lacking in bottom performers tell you that these are actual differentiators, right? Once you identify that, you've got a benchmark, and that benchmark can be used for hiring. That's the application of behavioral science. So once that is developed, you can then apply that into, say, an assessment on the front end, where a candidate is now going through. Candidate takes an assessment and is immediately being compared against that benchmark, and that benchmark, the output of that is a report that says, here's how the candidate fits in this job at your company. We can now apply that same type of technology to reference checking. that same type of behavioral science to reference checking. So essentially what's happening there is that same kind of competency model is being developed. And then instead of asking the candidate questions, you're asking actually references questions about how that candidate would match those competencies for that job in that company.
Do you find that this behavioral science may have different results for different roles? So possibly a more structured role, like an accountant, for example, may have more predictability as compared to, say, a more unstructured role, such as a salesperson.
Well, I think there are going to be different traits that are going to come into play. So, say for accounting, you're going to have personality attributes that are going to come in, right? You're going to have competencies and traits that are going to really help determine success in that role. But there are also very specific skills that are going to come into play, and you can't. I joke all the time about, I fly almost every week, right? And I fly Southwest Airlines a lot. And while I really like that Southwest pilots have a great sense of humor and they fit the company culture great, I really need them to be able to fly a 737, right? So there are certain skills that are going to come in certain technical roles like that. Whereas in sales, you may be far more reliant on the personality characteristics, the competencies, the traits. So it applies in both areas, but you've got to know sort of the role of skills as well. And that becomes an important distinction.
Okay. How are some of the disruptive technologies we're seeing, such as social media or mobility, impacting or influencing employee screening technologies?
Social media is an interesting one, in terms of its impact on employee selection. And I say it's interesting because I don't think that we necessarily understand it yet. Just this week there was an article in TechCrunch about about using clout scores now as part of the screening process, right? And you're wincing, and I think that's normally the reaction that you get. And and using Facebook as part of screening, and certainly LinkedIn is now a real component of screening, right? I don't think you'd find many organizations that aren't using it as a component, but I don't think we necessarily fully understand how social media in general is going to really impact the screening process. Mobility is a whole different story. The distinction between, a mobile application or mobile device or mobile recruiting and non-mobile recruiting almost is non-consequential at this point, right? Because just the nature of the way that candidates are applying today, you look at just our own statistics alone through Check.com and where candidates are taking the test. And, it's about 30% are coming through mobile devices today, and that continues to grow every single month. If you're not making it very easy for your candidates to apply online and do it through a mobile device, you're going to be at a real distinct disadvantage, particularly if you're recruiting from a population that, say, was born after 1980 or something along those lines. You're going to be at a very distinct disadvantage.
What advice would you offer the HR or business leader that's about to create or append their talent acquisition strategy and will be including employee selection technologies in that strategy?
Understand the business results. Understand what you're looking for. I think a lot of times what an organization does is they'll hear about something like, pre-employment assessment, say. And they'll say, geez, you know what? We don't have an assessment in place today. We really need to get it in there. This is a box in our hiring workflow that's open. We need to really get something in there. That's fine, but understand what it is that you're driving at. Understand the end business result you're going for. What is it that you're looking to achieve through this? And what we tell all the clients all the time is saying, well, we're trying to reduce turnover, right? Or we're trying to reduce time to hire or something is not enough. You really got to get into core business metrics, right? What is the end goal of that organization? Is it to increase sales? Are you really focused around organizationally around, increasing the customer service or customer satisfaction? Or what are those goals? And then after you identify those goals, looking at tools that can really help you achieve those ends. If you can't draw a direct line between a technology that you're looking to put in place today as part of your HR technology stack and an end business goal, save your money.
Well, with that interesting comment, I think we're at a good break point for our conversation. This is Chuck Schaefer. I've been joined by Greg Moran, founder and president of Check.com. Greg, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it.